dissolvable with a little bit of sediment in there that you have to make sure that everything's sterilised, dissolve it in the water, and then just slowly give it to him. That's an experience in itself. Trying to get a 4-month-old to take medicine that I know it doesn't like the taste of, I know it doesn't want inside his mouth, and it's also grainy. But anyway, so this morning is slightly different. Obviously getting up an hour earlier, so by the time I'm actually starting in my training, Rue's not actually up at that time. This morning he was up maybe 10 minutes before I started, so I had time to maybe like change his nappy and stuff like that before I started, but I didn't have time to do the traditional morning routine, which meant that Adele had to get up with him and look after him. But, well, that's what would typically happen. This morning was a little different because last night was a bit of a shit show in regards to sleep. Rue is currently teething. We found out, I think yesterday, that his first 2 front teeth on the bottom are starting to breach through his gums, just the tiniest little slither, but it explains why he's been drooling so much that he sucks all of his tops through and his hands barely leave his mouth, and he will try to latch on and bite off a chunk of your hand if it gets too close. All in the name of comfort for him, the poor little guy. So, yeah, so he had a particularly bad night, very, very clingy. He wakes up and he's next to me and he wants you, and you try to comfort him and then try and help him, encourage him to self-soothe, just as part of the sleep training that we've been doing. But especially while he's still in our room and he knows that we're there, he will not settle. He is incredibly resilient and persistent, and he won't settle until he gets his own way, it turns out. Which meant that Dell was up a lot with him and got very little sleep, I must admit. I only got between 4 and 5 hours sleep because I went to bed a little bit later, anticipating I guess a slightly better night than we got. I was up about 4, I think, trying to sort of help settle him down for a good 30-40 minutes, and then obviously got up a bit earlier in the morning. Oftentimes once you've gone through that process of settling it down, you're quite awake and you can't always get back to sleep. Quite a common thing. If I'm honest, I'm trying to remember this morning, and it feels like a blur of the last couple of days because they've all been sort of equally as bad, equally as sleep deprived. But this morning, luckily I had a relatively slightly better night's sleep yesterday with a little bit of a nap and stuff like that, so I was able to survive the morning being a little bit more tired, a little bit less sleep. So what I did was, I actually, because Dell had such an awful night and I knew that I was training, it was just the training doesn't require me interacting much with it. I'm just watching a training session, and in like a team setting, but there's minimal to no interaction. So I thought I'll take Ruben with me, get him in there, get him settled, and just give him his medicine later on. He naps every an hour and a half at the minute. Typically, we've gone for 2 hours normally, but the last couple of days, he's only been sleeping for 30 minutes at a time, and his naps, which is less, normally do 45 to an hour, so we're trying to actually increase the frequency of the naps. So I knew that if I had him in with me within an hour and a half, he'd be going to sleep, and then that would give till an extra 2 hours sleep in the morning. And it didn't really affect me because I'm in there, I'm still doing the training, I'm recording the training anyway, so I can look back over it and reference it. It doesn't affect me, really. It's not something I typically do. It is what it is. Sometimes you just need to make do when you've got naps, and he just loves that sort of like slight distraction, and he'll calm down again. And then over the last sort of week, really, we've perfected the nap time process. We've got it down to a relative art form. Before, a couple of weeks ago, before maybe like a week or two ago, Dell was having to take him into the bedroom. Actually, originally it started just in the living room. Dell would sing to him and rock him until he fell asleep, and it worked. But something happened during his 4-month sleep regression where it stopped working really as well. She transitioned up into the bedroom, doing it with a slightly darkened room and some white noise, and then singing to him and rocking him, and maybe after 10-20 minutes he would drop off and he would sleep on Dell. He would only nap on Dell. It wouldn't drop asleep if I did this. I couldn't do this rocking and singing. It wouldn't work. It's only Dell. It must be something to do with him knowing that she's a source of food, she's a source of comfort, and she's a safe space. But one thing it did for me was I could take him out on his pram and walk him, and he would drop off. He typically got quite upset going into the pram just because I think historically, before he was medicated, his reflux would bother him and he felt quite uncomfortable laying on his back, whereas now it's possibly more just an association because his reflux doesn't bother him as much anymore. But I found that if he got to his nap time and he was getting really wound up, all I would have to do is take him out in the pram. Sometimes it would be instant, sometimes the cold air would just hit his face and it would be off like a light, and he would sleep incredibly well. I could walk him around the block and bring him home and sit him in the kitchen, and he would just stay there asleep, sound asleep. All the times he might kick off for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, getting a little bit angry, but eventually he would rock off, because one thing I've definitely learned, and I think a lot of babies have it, is they don't like that feeling of falling asleep. They don't like that sensation of that transition of brain function. It startles them, panics them, stresses them out. Obviously, the longer you leave it before getting them down to the nap, they can become overtired, they can release cortisol and adrenaline, and it makes it even harder for them to drop off because they're stressed already before you even try settling them down. But for a long time now, as soon as we realised that they had specific wake windows and they had to get down, we try and get them down within that period, within that time. And it's been working good. It's been working pretty well, but maybe a week ago, we got to, there was a day where Rue would not settle at all for any of his naps when Dell did it. He just wouldn't fall asleep. So for every single nap, I had to take him out. I think it was every single nap. I had to take him out in the pram, and he settled almost instantly. And I'd bring him back and I'd put him in the kitchen, So I just rocked him back and forth in the kitchen, and eventually, 5-10 minutes later, he calmed down, settled down, dropped off, fell asleep, and he slept in there originally for a good 45 minutes to an hour. He had really good sleep, slept really well, and I was able to repeat that all that day and the next day, because this was where, well, obviously we've had a lot of storms recently, a lot of incredibly bad wind and rain, and it's not very good weather for walking a pram out in. You can in rain, that's fine, but in wind, I put the pram with the brake on just outside the house as I was opening the door, and a gust of wind caught the pram, unlocked the brake somehow, and started trying to roll it down the road. So, as a result of that, I didn't trust taking the pram out in the strong winds. Also, there's a good chance it might get blown over or anything, because we live in an area that is on the side of, in a sense, a valley, and on the other side of it is the Pennines, and the wind from the Pennines dropping down into the valley comes straight up the other side, straight up the Wild State, and it acts like a wind tunnel, so it's incredibly powerful winds as well. Like our neighbour at the back, their entire fence blow over during the storms, like it's a big long fence, probably a 20-metre fence, the entire thing just blew over. Anyway, I digress. Moving back. So, I was able to rock him back and forward, just pushing forward, backwards, for a good 10 minutes maximum, 15, just on the off chance he was feeling particularly unsettled. And it worked incredibly well. So I thought, right, next thing we need to automate this. Being an engineer, I needed a system, I needed a way that I could simplify this, turn this into a standard process that I can just apply for every single nap with minimal intervention from myself and from Adele, so we can go off and do other things. Like, obviously previously his naps have been very resource intensive. He's needed to nap on one of us before, and I wanted to be able to remove that, so we were able to, Del could go have a nap, or I could do housework, or vice versa. Or even, obviously in this case, I could go back to my training, because all I had to do was put him down and let him nap. Because we bought a little electrical battery powered rocking machine, it's called a rocket. We were slightly reluctant to buy it just because it's relatively expensive, £40. It's not crazy expensive, obviously, but if it didn't work, it felt like a bit of an investment. But it's not very big, but for our pram, which is it's not like a really strong sturdy pram, it's well built, well designed, but it's got a bit of a shake and wobble to it, which is what we want for helping to drop him off. So you get this little rocket thing, you strap it to the side of the pram, and you can change the intensity of it. You just push a button, and I think it must have some sort of offset weight inside that rotates. So as it rotates, it moves the rocket from side to side, and obviously the whole, as long as it's rigidly attached to the pram, moves the whole pram sort of side to side and creates a gentle swaying motion. The same sort of motion that you would be getting from taking him out on a walk and a stroll around the estate. So, tried it. The usual 5 to 10 minutes of getting a bit annoyed, having a little bit of a moan, and then dropped off. It worked like an absolute dream. We have a little nanny cam set up to lock in, so we can see when it's dropped off, so we can start to sleep time, because we like to monitor his naps, so we know that he's getting enough sleep through the day, and that when he wakes up from his nap, we know when his next nap is due, because you want to try and fit it in that wake window. So yeah, that's what I was able to do this morning. An hour and a half after he'd been awake. I was mid-training, but I was recording the training, and it was only going to take me about 2 minutes to go downstairs, get him slightly wrapped up in his pram suit. Not fully wrapped up because he's indoors, so just put his as like a bed, like a cushioned backing for him. Pop him in there, fully cover him. White noise. Turn the rocket on. Just leave him. Able to watch him on the nanny cam. Wait for him to drop off, and it was amazing. It works incredibly well. That gave me time to go back to my course and do my training. Gave Del time to stay in bed and nap, because when he gets up from his nap, because his sleeping is a bit more pliable, we'll put him straight into the boob for a little bit of food, so he can have a little bit of milk, because he's been rejecting the boob a bit recently, especially if he's a bit too, I guess, grumpy, or if he's been awake a little bit too long and he's overstimulated maybe. He's been feeding less through the day and more through the night, so what we try and do to make sure that he gets a good feed is, when he wakes from his nap, straight onto the boob, let him have a nice feed, because he's quite pliable and compliant, and then just keep repeating that cycle. But that means that once he's fed, then if Del really wanted to, she could go back to sleep or do what she wants, because as long as I'm available I can then have him, which before didn't really have that. It was quite dependent on Del to get him down for his naps and sort of look after him, because he was feeling a lot more regular. But, so yeah, that's sort of this morning. I was able to go back to my training until about midday, because by that point Del had woken up, she'd had a bit more sleep. Del looked after her for a bit. Then around 12 o'clock midday, went down, made some lunch. Another ham sandwich again, surprise. Although, but while I was down there, I had Del alarmingly shout at me, sounding a little bit, I can't tell if it was panicked or just humoured, that she's always so happy to tell me that we've had a blowout. Rue had managed to shat out of his nappy up his back again, as usual. So, in the time it had taken me to clean that up, I'd put the sandwiches down on a booth that we have in front of the sofa, and I looked around and I saw Luna just French kissing my sandwich. She had her tongue quite deep into it. Luna's a dog. If I haven't mentioned her, she is a Chihuahua with a lovely personality to multi people. The dog, she's a little bit grumpy, that's just the Chihuahua in her. She's a little bit plump now since she had her ovaries out. It turns out that they don't need as much food afterwards, which I didn't know about. She doesn't need as much food afterwards because they're not driven by their instincts as much, so they don't actually, it's not the metabolism slows down, it's just they're not actually as active afterwards. But yes, I turned around to see her full on licking my sandwich, so I ended up having to go cut that bit of the sandwich off. She did not get it because she did not deserve it. Instead she got a good telling off. So yeah, I managed to clean up a dirty nappy, eat a sandwich, and then go and have a power nap as well, because I must admit I was feeling extremely rough. I've had quite a severe headache for the last few days, which for a long time that wouldn't have been unusual, but recently it's very unusual. I've had a lot of headaches recently and they've started to come back, and I don't know why, but the sleep and that did help. It helped quite considerably. And then in the afternoon, the training was finished. There was just a lot of revision. I've got an exam coming up for all the courses that I've been doing recently for work to get my accreditation, so I'll have an official software accreditation for consulting. So I've just been doing revision in the afternoon, and then since then it's just been the usual nighttime routine. Keep Rue company as much as possible, and take him out on a little walk, strapping him to my chest in his little harness, and he's got like a waterproof fleece lined cover that you can put over him with just so I made burgers for tea, some French fries in the air fryer, which I was very much against the air fryer when we was first gifted it. I thought it was a waste of space, waste of everything really. I thought it was crap, but one thing it definitely does do is it does decent French fries. Gets them nice and crisp. And I love making burgers. I love a good quality burger. A lot of places don't understand like how simple a nice burger can be to make. Nice thin patties, grilled on a high temperature grill. Unfortunately, we can't have any cheese in there. Well, I could, but we don't have any in, obviously, because they'll can't eat any because of Fru's intolerances. So, just a nice simple homemade vegan burger sauce. Some vegan brioche buns. That's obviously because we don't want butter or dairy or egg in there. But then obviously some good quality beef mince. It's nice patties, 2 patties per burger that cook quicker. You get more of that Maillard reaction, that brownness on the outside if you have 2 patties. The homemade burger sauce, bit of lettuce. That was it today. Yesterday we had some hash browns and eggs. We made the same just because obviously you have 4 buns, so that's 2 meals worth for 2 people. And then yeah. Boring but simple and still delicious. Round that all off by doing the usual bedtime routine of noddy duddy daddy time, which is Rue getting naked, me taking my top off, and we just have a little bit of a chill together before having a little read in Rue's nursery, trying to get him a little bit more familiar with being in there. And then his bath time, where he bloody loves bath, thank God. He loves being warm. Clean his hands, get them nice and cleaned up, get them all soapy cleaned up. Put a flannel over him that keeps us up warm because we don't have the bath too full because we don't want him to risk drowning, obviously. But he started grabbing the flannel and sucking on it, I think, as part of his coping mechanism for the pain of teething. And then I play my acoustic guitar and sing to him a little bit. Admittedly very badly, but I believe I've already mentioned that, so yeah. Then, yeah, clean him up, pass him over to Dell, popped him down, and the rest is history. We were able to watch a little bit of TV, Adele and I. This is Going to Hurt, based on a book, basically a memoir book by a doctor who left being a doctor because of how troubled it made him, but there's a lot of interesting stories in there that have been turned into the TV show, which, if I'm honest, it's incredible. I would definitely recommend it. I would give it a watch, and our doctor friend has basically confirmed that for her partner it was funny to watch, but for her it was too close to home, that it wasn't funny, that was just real life for her, including all the darker moments as well. But yeah, so I'd recommend watching that easily. That's my day. I'm hoping that you've been sufficiently bored to sleep